Claire Bennett tightened her grip around the man's wrist at the very second the elevator doors slid open. She shouted over the pounding music erupting from the penthouse. "Finally, you're here. The dancer has arrived, ladies." A large man in a black suit stood just behind Julian and immediately stepped forward, his hand reaching toward his waistband, his eyes sharp as blades, ready to sweep Claire's hand away and protect his boss. But in that instant, Julian lifted one finger, a small, decisive, impeccably authoritative gesture that halted the bodyguard mid-motion as if he had frozen in the air. Julian cast a quick glance around the chaotic room, then lowered his gaze to the woman boldly holding his wrist. Something in the fire of her eyes amused him, or perhaps he simply wanted an excuse to escape the tense meeting happening downstairs for just a few minutes. That subtle nod of permission was what doomed him. Claire seized the chance and yanked him inside with a strength almost unbelievable for a young woman balancing on glittering high heels. She slapped her hand against the close button. The elevator doors glided shut just inches from the stunned bodyguard's face, trapping him outside with nothing but bewilderment. The moment Julian stepped across the threshold, a chorus of 20 drunken women screamed as if they were at a Bon Jovi concert in the year 1987. Claire had no idea she had just dragged the hotel's owner, an actual Mafia kingpin, into the center of a Bachelorette party, leaving his entire security team stranded behind a thick wooden door. The bride, Natalie, wearing a plastic sparkling tiara and draped in a sash that read "Kiss the Bride," immediately climbed onto the sofa. Someone tossed a handful of confetti toward the spinning ceiling fan, scattering it like cheap artificial snow. A pounding remix of Pony blasted from a portable speaker against the wall. Claire pulled out her phone and smiled when she saw Nick's message. "Have fun. Don't worry about me. Come home early." Nick was always like that. Gentle, safe, never jealous without reason. Completely different from the madness of Las Vegas swirling around her. She inhaled deeply and promised herself she would misbehave only for tonight, before returning to being his sweet, steady girlfriend. She shoved her phone into her pocket, not even looking closely at the man's face. All she saw were broad shoulders, a white dress shirt with sleeves neatly rolled up, dark tailored trousers, and the most bewildered expression she had ever witnessed. Perfect, she thought. Genuine confusion was always a good sign. It meant he was already committed to the role. "Come on," she urged, pulling him deeper into the room filled with laughter. "You're late." We almost demanded a refund. He didn't resist, perhaps realizing his bodyguard was stuck outside and deciding he didn't want to spark unnecessary violence with a group of intoxicated women. His body remained stiff, as if he was not accustomed to being touched without invitation. His dark eyes swept across the room, not like a man searching for vodka, but like someone scanning for threats. Claire didn't notice. She was too busy watching Natalie. "Our surprise is finally here," Claire announced triumphantly. Deafening shrieks followed. One friend brandished a handful of $1 bills. Another tried to place a light pink feathered cowboy hat on his head. He instinctively stepped back. Claire grabbed his hand. "No escaping. Sit." When he didn't move, she gave him a gentle shove until he dropped into a large armchair placed in the center of the room for the performance. The screaming intensified. Phones shot up. Flashlights strobed. At the bride's command, Claire climbed onto his lap. She assumed he would play along, maybe laugh, maybe flirt. Instead, he looked at her as if studying an unfamiliar creature from another planet. Close up, Claire noticed the details she had missed before. The sharp cut of his jaw, the dark eyes with a faint ring of gold near the pupils, and the firm, controlled line of his mouth. He looked nothing like the rip-off pants dancer who had performed at her friend's birthday last year. This man looked as though he had just stepped out of a board meeting. "You don't seem very excited," Claire teased, placing her hand on his chest. "We paid. Excitement is mandatory." His chest rose once, slow and controlled. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice deep and steady. Claire burst into laughter. "They all say that at the beginning," Natalie shouted. "Take off the shirt." The man didn't react. Claire shrugged. "Fine, I'll help." She reached for the top button. He narrowed his eyes slightly but didn't stop her. When she unbuttoned the next one, the room exploded with cheers. Claire pulled the fabric apart, revealing a chest carved with strength, not the kind sculpted for fun at the gym, but the kind shaped by discipline. His body was real, his control was real, and the way he watched her made her almost forget what she was doing. Almost. She slid the shirt off his shoulders, unhindered. He didn't move except to keep observing her face, as though reading every breath she took. She had never been looked at like that, not with humor, not with embarrassment, not with irritation, but with focus, as if she was the only thing that existed in the room. Her stomach tightened, and it had nothing to do with margaritas. The women pressed closer. Claire cracked a joke to break the tension building too quickly. "All right, sir. Normally this is the part where you say something seductive." His voice remained calm. "I am not the person you think I am." Before Claire could answer, the door burst open. A man in a black suit froze at the threshold. His eyes darted from the half-naked man in the chair, to Claire sitting in his lap, to the screaming women, the confetti-covered floor, and the pink cowboy hat someone was waving behind them. Silence fell, sudden and absolute, as if someone had switched off the entire world. Claire stared at the suited man. "Boss." The man beneath her exhaled slowly, deep, controlled, and touched by an unnamed danger. The suited newcomer swallowed. "Mr. Romano, security is waiting on the lower level. There is a situation in the casino. They need your decision." Romano. Claire's throat tightened. Anyone who had ever stepped foot in Las Vegas knew that name. Julian Romano, owner of Romano Resorts, private casino magnate, a man with political influence, and the whispered midnight rumors in dim bars, rumored ties to the underworld, power beyond the law. And Claire was sitting on his lap. If you've listened this far and feel that something in this story has touched a quiet corner of your heart, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Like and share this video so we can continue bringing heartfelt stories every day. And if you don't mind, would you tell me where you're watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We treasure every word you share. Claire shot up from Julian Romano's lap so quickly that her margarita toppled over the carpet. She stumbled backward, bumping into the coffee table and nearly falling, her arms flailing helplessly in the air as if trying to grab onto nothing. "Oh my God," she stammered, her face burning with heat. I'm so sorry. We didn't know. I thought you were." Julian remained seated in the armchair, the white dress shirt draped loosely over his shoulder, the firm lines of his chest illuminated beneath the soft penthouse lighting. He said nothing, did not smile, simply watched her as though analyzing each of her reactions with quiet precision. A few women began inching away from him, as though he carried some dangerous electric charge. Natalie ducked, behind the sofa, peeking out from behind an oversized pillow. The room grew so quiet Claire could hear the faint trace of music still echoing from the Bluetooth speaker. Julian rose slowly, folding his shirt with a gesture so simple, yet laced with an authority that silenced every breath in the room. He swung the shirt over his shoulder without haste, then turned toward the man in the suit who had just addressed him as Sir. His voice was low, cold, almost emotionless. "Who is on lobby duty tonight?" The man shifted nervously. "Samuel, sir. I'll replace him immediately." Julian nodded once, then turned his gaze back to Claire. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. "I'm truly sorry," she repeated, her voice hoarse. "I didn't know. I didn't think. I had no idea who you were." Julian walked toward her, not fast, not threatening, but each step made her want to retreat. He stopped just an arm's length away. "Then tell me," he asked, his voice almost gentle, "who exactly did you think your friend hired me to be?" A choked laugh escaped from someone in the corner before dying instantly. Claire opened her mouth, but no words formed. Julian tilted his head, the deep brown of his eyes catching the light, revealing an edge of genuine curiosity rather than mockery. You're not angry?" she asked softly, sounding like a child caught stealing cookies. Julian raised one eyebrow. "Should I be angry because I was dragged into a room full of intoxicated women while wearing a tailored dress shirt and preparing to handle a conflict downstairs in the casino?" Claire bit her lip, utterly unsure how to respond. Julian turned to the bodyguard. "Lucas, I'll be down shortly. Wait by the elevator." The man nodded, stepped out, and closed the door behind him. Julian looked at Claire again. "Your name?" "Claire," she whispered. "Claire Bennett." Julian repeated her name slowly, each syllable deliberate, as if tasting the sound of it. Then he turned to leave. But when he reached the door, he paused and glanced over his shoulder. "This is certainly the most memorable bachelorette party I've ever walked into." He opened the door and disappeared without another look. The moment it closed, the entire room erupted like someone had uncorked a bottle of champagne. Natalie shot up from the sofa, screaming, "You were sitting on Julian Romano's lap!" Another woman practically shrieked, "Not just sitting, you took his shirt off." Someone else gasped, "Oh my God, Claire, you touched the chest of an actual Mafia boss." Claire collapsed onto the nearest chair, burying her face in her hands, her voice trembling. "I'm going to be arrested, or exiled, or, I don't know. I'll have to live under a new identity." Natalie hugged her pillow, laughing until tears streaked down her cheeks. "No, you won't. He wasn't mad. He looked at you like you were the lead in some romantic action movie." Claire shook her head, unable to stop the chaos spinning inside her. Images swirled wildly. His eyes, his sculpted chest, his steady hands that never pushed her away, and the way he looked at her not with fear, not with irritation, but as though reading her like an open book. A voice chimed from behind them. "Claire, you just turned Julian Romano into the highlight of the night. We should thank you," Claire sighed. "Or call the police. Depends on how this ends." But deep inside, somewhere beneath the shame and the shock, something else was stirring. Not exactly fear, not quite humiliation. Something uneasy yet alive, like she had cracked open a door leading into a world she had never meant to enter but now could not stop thinking about. Claire sat frozen in the very armchair Julian Romano had occupied moments earlier, her palms still tingling with the warmth of his body even though minutes had passed. All the noise around her felt distant, hollow, because her mind was drowning beneath a wave of panic, embarrassment, and disbelief so powerful it made her dizzy. His name was Julian Romano. She had heard it before, even seen it flash across a finance magazine during a team meeting, but she had never connected that powerful name to the man she had dragged out of an elevator and stripped in front of 20 women recording the entire spectacle. Her hands trembled visibly as she pulled her phone from her dress pocket. She typed his name into the search bar. The results appeared instantly. Chairman and CEO of Romano Resorts. Estimated personal net worth in the hundreds of millions of dollars. A corporation spanning hotels, casinos, fine dining restaurants, and private resorts. Rumored political donor for campaigns in New York. And darker whispers, resurfacing only in sensational articles and criminal underworld forums. A leader of a surviving branch from Italian-American mafia lineage, holding power both legitimate, shadowed. One older headline surfaced, "Julian Romano, the man no one refuses." Claire's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She scrolled through photos. Julian in a black tuxedo beside politicians. Sitting ringside at a boxing match. Shaking hands with the mayor. Speaking at an investment summit. His face stone still. His eyes seemingly piercing through whoever stood in front of him. And then a picture that nearly made her drop her phone. It was him, exactly him, Julian Romano, in a rolled-sleeve white dress shirt stepping out of a Rolls-Royce in front of a Las Vegas hotel. Several bodyguards trailing behind, his gaze sharp enough to cut through air, as though time had frozen around him. Claire swallowed hard. Her heart slid into her stomach. She had climbed onto the lap of a man more powerful than the mayor of the entire city. And she had placed her hands on his chest, unbuttoning him while her friends cheered like they were at a county fair. She turned to Natalie, her voice barely a ragged whisper. "Do you understand what I've done?" Natalie was still curled on the sofa, half her face hidden behind the pillow, but her eyes were huge. "You climbed onto Julian Romano and demanded he do a striptease." A tiny broken sound crawled out of Claire's throat. "Do you think he'll sue me?" Natalie laughed out loud. "Are you kidding? If he was angry, he would have had us all dragged out of here already." Claire shook her head, clutching her phone like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. "I don't understand. Why didn't he say anything? Why did he let me keep going? Why did he look at me like I was some kind of equation he needed to solve?" Natalie shrugged. "Maybe because you were more interesting than the people who usually throw themselves at him. Maybe he thought you were a funny accident. Or maybe you hit some strange weak spot." Claire forced a laugh. A weak spot? Like not knowing how to fight off drunk women? But her mind wouldn't stop replaying it the moment she opened the first button. The calm way he watched her, the absence of annoyance, the silence so deliberate it felt intentional. He hadn't pushed her away. He hadn't smiled politely the way people do when they're mistaken for someone else. He had simply sat there, still, composed, letting her cross a line she had never meant to cross. Claire groaned, burying her face in her hands. I should pack and leave Las Vegas before sunrise. Natalie placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Or you could have another drink, laugh this off, and accept that you just gave us a story we'll be talking about for the next 10 years. But Claire didn't laugh. Something inside her was growing, not just panic, not just shame. It felt like she had wandered into a game where the main player could turn anyone into a piece if he wished. And the most unsettling part was that she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to walk away. The next morning, Claire woke with a dull, throbbing headache and a hazy uncertainty about whether the previous night had been real or just a strange, alcohol-blurred dream. Sunlight pushed through the curtains, making her squint, and the faint scent of liquor mixed with cinnamon still lingered in the air. She reached for her phone. 2 missed calls from her mother. 1 message from Natalie. Awake yet? I bought pastries. Dining room, 4th floor. Claire leaned back against the headboard and reopened her browser. Julian Romano's name was still sitting in her search history. She slid her finger across the screen to delete it, but paused when a small suggestion box appeared. Recommended images. She tapped it. A single photo appeared, taken from a high vantage point, pointed straight into last night's penthouse suite. The image was slightly grainy, but unmistakable Claire, in her teal dress, perched on Julian Romano's lap. She froze. A tiny watermark sat in the bottom right corner, an odd, unfamiliar insignia belonging to no legitimate news outlet she recognized. No caption, no explanation, just an image, quiet, chilling, and more than enough to send her stomach plummeting. She checked the link. It was already inaccessible, removed or encrypted. She tried saving it, but the moment she pressed down on the screen, the file vanished from temporary storage. Claire shot to her feet, heart hammering. She grabbed her charger, shoved it into her bag, and rushed out the door. When she stepped into the elevator, she startled the mirror reflected a man standing behind her. Black suit, gray tie, sunglasses indoors. He said nothing, didn't even glance in her direction. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, Claire stepped out almost at a run. She didn't look back. Natalie was sitting by the window, chewing on a croissant, earphones plugged in. Claire collapsed into the chair across from her and whispered, "Did you see anyone following me?" Natalie pulled out an earbud, frowning. "What?" Claire scanned the room before pulling out her phone, desperately searching for the picture. Nothing. No trace. Not in the history. Not in storage. Not in the cache. As if it had never existed. "I saw a photo," Claire whispered, "of me and Julian last night, taken from above, like from a hidden camera." Natalie blinked fast. "You mean someone was watching you? Who would do that?" Claire shook her head. "I don't know. But it wasn't the press. The logo was strange. And then it disappeared." Natalie let out a slow exhale. "Do you think someone was following you? Or following Julian?" Claire didn't respond. Her mind replayed Julian's steady gaze from the night before, the unnerving calm, the way he hadn't looked surprised when dragged into the penthouse, the way he studied every movement as though anticipating them. And Lucas, the bodyguard, appearing at exactly the right moment. She didn't have time to speak. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number lit up the screen. Her pulse jumped. Natalie mouthed, "Put it on speaker." Claire did. A man's voice came through, low, parched, stripped of emotion. "Are you Claire Bennett?" She clutched the phone. "Who is this?" "We know you made contact with Julian Romano. Your actions may have consequences. Some people do not appreciate curiosity." "I'm not curious about anything," Claire blurted, the panic tightening in her chest. "It was an accident, a misunderstanding. No one climbs onto the lap of a crime boss by accident," the voice answered, not raising his tone, but cold enough to send a shiver down her spine. "Leave Las Vegas before things escalate. This is advice, not a threat." The line went dead. Claire didn't move. Natalie whispered, "Holy hell, what did you get yourself into?" Claire couldn't answer. She felt only one thing. She was no longer a random tourist on vacation. She had become a piece, in a game whose rules lay far beyond her understanding. Claire sat on the edge of the hotel bed, but the room no longer felt like a place of rest. It felt like a gilded cage. She had finished packing nearly 30 minutes ago. Yet every time she tried to walk toward the door, the front desk called her room with polite but persistent inquiries about whether she needed assistance with her luggage, though she had requested nothing. 3 times in a row. Natalie was nowhere in sight. She had left a small note on the coffee table. "Going to meet an old friend. Don't leave the hotel until we're sure. Call me if anything happens." Claire had called, each time ringing until it slid into voicemail. Once, twice, 3 times. The invisible walls around her felt as though they were closing in. The photo that vanished, the anonymous call, the icy warning, the strange glances she'd caught in the hallway, the housekeeper lingering too long at her door as though listening for movement, and, above all, the absolute silence from Julian Romano. No text, no apology, no acknowledgement that she even existed, but he was watching. Claire felt that certainty in her bones. From the moment she stepped into the elevator that morning, she had sensed eyes following her, not normal eyes, but the kind that measure every breath, every hesitation, as though a verdict were being formed in a room she was not allowed to enter. She stepped out onto the balcony, staring down at the hotel grounds. Below were the pool, rows of lounge chairs, a few guests sunbathing, and among them, several figures in black clothing with discreet earpieces, walking with steps far too steady, far too silent to be ordinary staff. Claire knew the type. She had seen them in movies, or in articles about powerful men untouched by the law. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Bennett," came a composed male voice, different from the first, polite yet firm. "This is Lucas, executive assistant to Mr. Romano. We request your presence in the meeting room on the 19th floor. There are matters best discussed in person." Claire tightened her grip on the phone. "Do I have the right to refuse?" "Of course," Lucas replied, his tone unchanged. "But if you do, we will need to keep you within the premises for your own safety until the situation is properly addressed." "Which option do you prefer?" A long silence followed. Then Claire exhaled. "I'll come up." When she stepped into the 19th floor meeting room, the silence struck her first. There was no one else, only Julian Romano standing with his back to her, staring out the full-length window over the expanse of Las Vegas. The late afternoon light washed over his shirt sleeves, turning him into a silhouette that hardly seemed real. Claire closed the door quietly, her palms damp. Julian didn't turn. "You seem to attract a great deal of attention," he said, his tone low and almost gentle, as if narrating a story rather than accusing her. "I didn't try to," Claire replied, still rooted to the spot. I don't know what's happening. Someone threatened me. Someone took a photo of us, and then they called me. They told me to leave the city." Julian turned, his gaze locking onto hers. For a moment, she felt stripped bare of every thought. "We know, and that is precisely why you cannot leave." "Why?" Claire's voice cracked under the weight of her fear. "I'm not involved. I don't know anything. I'm just a normal person who got dragged into all this because of a stupid mistake." Julian stepped toward her with slow, deliberate movements. "Who do you think called you, Claire? Social media pranksters?" "No. Those were old enemies of mine." Claire backed away, her fingers gripping the hem of her dress. "What about Natalie?" "She'll call the police if I disappear. And my mother," Julian cut her off without raising his voice. "Your loud friend is currently enjoying a complimentary VIP spa package and the presidential suite downstairs." Lucas confiscated her phone under the pretense of security protocol. "She is safe, as long as she stays where I put her. As for your mother, we've already sent a message from your phone assuring her you are well." Claire's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Julian stopped just an arm's length from her. "I need to know who you are, who you really are, and what they think you might be." "I'm just a marketing associate," she whispered. "I'm not worth anything. No mafia family, no secrets, nothing." Julian studied her for a long moment, then he turned away. "I truly hope that's the case." The air in the room thickened, heavy enough to smother her breath. For the first time since the night began, Claire no longer knew which was more dangerous, Julian's enemies, or Julian himself. Claire could not pinpoint the exact moment when everything began to shift. She only knew that after the tense meeting with Julian on the 19th floor, the world around her seemed to move to a different rhythm. She was no longer an ordinary guest, yet not quite a captive either. Romano Hotel had carved out a buffer around her, a luxurious, insulated cocoon that felt safe and almost entirely detached from the outside world. Each morning, someone delivered fresh coffee to her room. Each evening, her space was cleaned and arranged with meticulous care, books straightened, flowers refreshed, as if she were someone of significance. And Julian Romano appeared more frequently now, though never unexpectedly. He invited her to dinner in a private dining room on the 20th floor, not the main restaurant, but a secluded space lit with warm candlelight, a table set for two, and Italian dishes prepared specifically for them. Claire wore a simple black dress that had been placed in her closet earlier, accompanied by a small handwritten card, 8 tonight. If you don't come, I'll have to knock on your door. The signature was nothing more than a sweeping curl of ink, but she recognized it as his. When she arrived, Julian was already seated, dressed in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled high, and without a single bodyguard in sight. They ate in silence at first, accompanied only by the soft hum of vintage jazz drifting from an old speaker system. Claire studied him from across the table, trying to decipher something behind that calm, composed gaze. Julian was the kind of man whose silence filled a room. He poured her wine, lifted his own glass, but only swirled it, never drinking, his eyes never leaving her. After the first glass, Claire began to open up. She told him about work, the tedious events she had organized, the times her boss took credit for her ideas without acknowledgement, the feeling of blending into a world where people only noticed those who shone brightly. Julian listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer commentary. He simply watched her with a concentration so quiet it felt like he was searching for meaning beneath her words. "You never talk about yourself," Claire said when dessert was served. "You let people talk, you only listen. Because I've grown used to people hearing my name and assuming they already know everything about me," he replied softly. Claire didn't know what to say. She set her spoon down, her eyes meeting his. It was the first time she saw something other than control in his gaze. It was loneliness. After dinner, he offered to show her the hotel's private gym, a place she hadn't known existed. There were no guests, no staff, only dim lighting and the faint scent of newly polished wood. Julian removed his jacket, rolled his sleeves even higher, revealing strong forearms marked with a few pale scars. He stepped onto a treadmill, set it to an incline, and looked straight ahead. Claire hesitated, then climbed onto the machine beside him, setting it to the gentlest pace. "Didn't expect a Mafia boss to work out?" she teased. Julian didn't look over. Didn't expect a woman bold enough to climb onto a stranger's lap to be afraid of running. Claire laughed, truly laughed, and for the first time, the sound between them held no tension or suspicion. Then came the rooftop. He took her up through a private elevator, and the doors opened to a quiet world suspended above the city that never slept. The night wind swept through her hair. Below them, Las Vegas stretched out like an inverted sky of shimmering lights. Julian said nothing at first. He stood with his hands in his pockets, staring into the distance. Claire stepped beside him. They remained there in silence, while the city hummed somewhere far beneath their feet. "I used to hate this place," he said eventually. "Las Vegas. It's where everything I never chose began." Claire tilted her head toward him. "And now?" Julian looked at her. The hardness in his eyes softened, the layers of armor lowered. "I'm not sure, but tonight, maybe for the first time, I don't hate it entirely." Claire didn't answer. She simply stood beside him in the cool wind, next to a man she could not fully understand, and that was precisely what frightened her. When Claire returned to her room after their time on the rooftop, her mind still lingered on the way Julian had looked at her beneath the glow of the city lights, unguarded and wordless, a gaze that tightened something deep in her chest. She stood before the mirror for a long moment, not taking off her dress, not fixing her hair, simply staring at her reflection as if trying to understand who she was becoming in this strange, unfolding story. Outside, the Las Vegas sky suddenly darkened. The air shifted from warm to sharply cold. She heard the first rumble of thunder in the distance, followed by the lash of wind against the glass like a warning. A violent desert storm was rolling in. Just as she reached for the curtains, the doorbell rang. She startled, checked the peephole, then opened the door. Julian stood there, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone, a bottle of wine in one hand, 2 glasses in the other. "I figured you wouldn't be sleeping either," he murmured. She stepped back to let him in. The room gleamed with chandelier light, starkly contrasting the storm-darkened sky outside. Julian set the bottle down, then walked toward the smart home control panel on the wall. "This artificial light ruins the view," he muttered, his fingertip gliding across the screen. "Desert storms are best seen from the dark." With a single touch, the blinds slid open and every light in the room went out. The space sank into darkness, illuminated only by flashes of lightning carving through the sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Claire stiffened, retreating a step, her palms suddenly damp. The darkness disoriented her. Julian turned back, and the lightning illuminated half his face in sharp, shifting shadows. Sensing her tension, he poured a glass of wine and approached her, offering it gently. Their fingertips brushed warm, lingering. "You're afraid of the dark?" he asked, his low voice folding into the rumble of thunder. "I'm afraid of not knowing what comes next," she admitted, gripping the glass for steadiness. Julian watched her for a long moment, then tilted his head slightly, and in the dim storm-lit room his eyes carried an unexpected softness. "So am I." A streak of lightning split the sky, lighting his face for a heartbeat. Claire saw the depth there, quiet, unreadable, like the night before a storm. "You, a man who practically owns this city, you know fear?" she attempted, her voice lighter though her heartbeat wasn't. Julian let out a faint, almost rueful smile, sat down on the couch, and motioned for her to join him. "I fear the things I cannot control. Tonight, I don't want to face that alone." Claire looked away, fighting a feeling she didn't dare name. "I don't even know why I'm still here," she whispered. "Am I being kept because you're afraid I'll reveal something? Or because you think I'm a target for your enemies?" Julian set his glass aside and turned fully toward her. "At first it was both. Now, I'm not sure. I think I'm keeping you here for a reason I'm not brave enough to name." Claire met his gaze, the flicker of her phone screen casting him in distant, trembling light. "What are you afraid of?" she asked. Julian remained silent for a long moment. "I'm afraid that if I let you leave, I'll lose the chance to understand what this feeling is. And if I keep you close, I might hurt you." Claire drew in a steadying breath, then placed her hand gently on the back of his. Julian didn't pull away. Silence settled between them, softened by the rhythm of their breathing. She could feel her heartbeat sinking, with the stillness that wrapped around them. Julian leaned toward her, his eyes fixed on hers, as though waiting for her permission. Claire gave none aloud, only lifted her chin slightly, her lips trembling. Their first kiss was soft, like a whispered confession. Not hurried, not wild, but so deep it blurred the rest of the world. His lips tasted of wine and a loneliness held far too long. His hand rose to her cheek, steady, careful, as though afraid she might vanish if he didn't touch her in that exact moment. When they finally parted, neither spoke. Claire rested her head on his shoulder, eyes closed, and in the darkness, with rain beginning to tap against the glass, she realized she no longer felt lost. And Julian, for the first time in years, felt an unfamiliar stillness settle in his chest, as if the storm outside could no longer reach the place where he sat beside this woman. The morning after the storm, sunlight filtered through the sheer white curtains like threads of gold, falling softly onto the cool wooden floor. Claire opened her eyes in silence, her head still resting on Julian's shoulder. He had not left her side all night, nor had he made a single gesture that crossed a boundary. There had only been warm breath, a steady heartbeat, and a strange quietness that made her feel safer than in any room she had ever stayed in. Julian was still asleep, his eyes lightly closed. The usual tension in his face softened, and Claire realized it was the first time she had ever seen him look truly human, not a boss, not a man who controlled everything, not a force others feared, but simply a man, sleeping beside a woman he wasn't entirely sure he could trust. Claire eased herself away carefully so as not to wake him, then quietly rose to her feet. She walked toward the glass doors and drew the curtains aside. The sky was clear, and morning in Las Vegas felt unusually peaceful after the storm. Below, the rows of palms were still wet, and sunlight brushed across the red-tiled roofs of the resort villas, as though gilding them with gold. She heard movement behind her. Julian was awake. He sat up, bracing himself with both hands, watching her. There was no questioning, no guardedness, only a gentler look than she had ever seen. "You always wake this early?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. Claire turned and smiled. "I like the quiet before everything gets chaotic." Julian nodded and stepped closer. Yesterday, I think I owe you an apology. Claire tilted her head slightly. For what? For pulling you into a world you didn't choose. For doubting you. For thinking you were a threat when you were clearly just a woman dragged to Las Vegas by a friend for a party you didn't even want to be at. Claire let out a soft laugh. You're forgetting that I stripped your shirt off in front of 20 women and called you a hired dancer. Julian actually smiled, a real smile that brightened his entire face. Yes, I'll remember that when I need to humble myself. They stood closer now, without trying, as though the space between them had been filled with something silent but solid. Julian looked outside again and spoke softly. I had my people check the group that called you. They're an independent surveillance network, monitoring relationships that might disrupt balance in the underworld. I think they were trying to figure out whether you belonged to anyone. Claire frowned. And who did you think I belonged to? Julian paused, then said quietly, No one. Now I believe you're only yourself. He walked to the table, poured 2 cups of coffee from the thermos a staff member had delivered earlier, and placed one in front of her. I've ordered all surveillance around your room to be removed. From now on, you're my guest, not someone detained. And no one is tracking you. Claire wrapped her hands around the cup, the warmth settling her nerves. And if I want to leave? Julian met her eyes without evading the question. Then I'll let you go. But I hope that you'll want to stay a little longer. Claire didn't answer immediately. She sipped the coffee. She didn't know what would happen next, but in that moment bathed in morning light, breathing in the fragrant steam, and facing the man she once thought existed only on the pages of financial magazines, she realized she no longer felt lost. Everything suddenly seemed simpler. Not because she had answers, but because she was no longer afraid of the questions. Claire sat alone in the small cafe on the hotel's 3rd floor, a cozy space with dark brown leather chairs, warm golden light, and jazz playing softly like a quiet breath. Julian had left early after receiving an urgent call from the casino. He hadn't explained. He had only kissed her forehead lightly before striding out of the room, leaving behind a hollow space she didn't know how to name. She pulled out her phone, intending to text Natalie, but the screen suddenly went black, not powering down, not showing a low battery warning, simply going dark in a single blink. She pressed the power button. Nothing. Held the home button. No response. Just as she was about to set it down, the screen lit up abruptly, but it wasn't the home screen. Instead, a set of code appeared, lines of data flashing like something out of a spy film, accompanied by a small map in the lower right corner. On the map, a red dot blinked repeatedly, centered precisely on the location of the Romano Hotel. A chill swept through her. She pressed and held the power button again. The phone refused to shut off. She retrieved a small multi-tool from her purse and pried the battery out, even though it wasn't meant to be removable. When the device finally went dark, she stared at it on the table as though it had become something alive that had slithered into her private space. After several minutes she stood, carried the phone to the hotel's technical department, and calmly claimed it was malfunctioning. The attendant smiled, accepted the device, and promised to check and contact her within an hour. Claire thanked him, but unease weighed on her like a stone. She returned to her room to find everything exactly as she'd left it, yet nothing felt right. Her mind replayed small details. Last night, when Julian handed her the coffee, he had taken a call and turned away for a moment. Her phone had been on the table. She hadn't noticed until now, but she vaguely remembered the screen lighting briefly. She had assumed it was a social media notification. Now she wasn't so sure. A thought struck her like a sudden blast of cold air. What if that mysterious call hadn't been from an enemy? What if it had been a warning? What if someone had been trying to tell her that Julian was the one who had placed the tracking software? Claire shook her head, rejecting it. Julian wasn't like that. At least the man she had spent those quiet hours with wasn't. But then she remembered the look in his eyes the night they kissed. Eyes shaped by loss, betrayal, and years of building walls that no one could easily break through. And she understood. He could be genuine with her and still capable of doing things she couldn't fathom, if it meant protecting what he valued. When the phone was returned, the staff member simply smiled and said it had been handled, offering no detail. Everything looked normal, too normal, and that felt even more unsettling. She didn't mention any of it to Julian that evening. They had dinner as usual, warm lights, candles, wine, little stories he rarely shared. But for the first time, Claire avoided his eyes for too long. She smiled. She nodded. But inside her was an empty space widening slowly. One quiet question echoed in her mind all night, like the ticking of a countdown clock. If this was all part of a carefully constructed illusion meant to earn her trust, then what role was she playing? And the most frightening thing wasn't that she doubted Julian. It was that she wasn't sure she wanted the truth anymore. Julian barely looked at her the next morning, even though they shared breakfast in the 19th floor dining room as usual. He ordered her favorite dishes, poured wine for her, sat across from her as though nothing had changed, yet a quiet distance had settled between them that she could feel more acutely than ever. Her questions were still forming when Julian acted first. After lunch, as she prepared to return to her room, Lucas appeared with a stiff expression and a terse message. Julian requested that she temporarily remain within his private floors of the hotel. Claire frowned, feeling the walls close in like a gilded cage. She marched straight to Julian's office, didn't knock, and shoved the heavy wooden door open as if challenging him. Julian was standing by the large window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the city as though using the view to shield his emotions. Claire closed the door behind her and spoke not loudly, but clearly. "What are you doing, Julian?" He turned slowly, his gaze stripped of the softness it once held. "I think we need some distance." Claire clenched her fists. "Why? Just days ago you said I was no longer being watched. Things have changed." Julian walked to his desk, flipping through papers, deliberately avoiding her eyes. "You were approached by people I can't control. They could have installed something on your phone or used you for access. I can't take that risk." Claire felt her body go rigid. "You think I'm a spy? After everything between us, you still think I'm a threat?" Julian finally looked at her. "I think you're a possibility." "A possibility of what? A pawn? A weak spot? Or just an excuse for you to retreat before anything becomes too real?" Julian didn't respond at first. He drew a long breath. "I cannot let emotion compromise my boded safety or theirs. If something happened to you because of me, I wouldn't forgive myself." Claire laughed, a brittle breaking sound. "So you push me away, lock me in, not because you distrust me, but because you're afraid you'd care too much." Julian's silence was the confirmation she didn't want. She turned and left the room quickly, before she broke in front of him. Returning to her suite, she found her belongings rearranged, everything inspected and shifted just enough that only she would notice. They were isolating her. No messages from Natalie, no calls. Every line of communication filtered or cut off without explanation. She looked around the luxurious suite that had once felt like a sanctuary. Now it felt like a cell without bars. That night, Claire sat by the window, the city lights casting weary shadows across her face. She remembered Julian's rare laughs, the long conversations, the quiet touches, the kiss in the storm that had felt too real to call temporary. But now all of it felt like an echo fading in a cavern. She finally understood. It wasn't that Julian didn't trust her. It was that he would not allow himself to trust anything that made him vulnerable. And she, ordinary, uncalculated, impossible to predict, was the most dangerous presence in his meticulously controlled world. Claire closed her eyes and leaned her forehead against the glass, letting disappointment wash through her. In a world where everything had a price, she had unknowingly become the one thing Julian feared losing most. And for that reason, he had to push her away. The sky over Las Vegas was unusually heavy that day, the air thick as though something unseen was pressing down on the city. Claire paced across the vast living room, unease crawling through her stomach like a line of ants. Julian had left early at dawn with Lucas, leaving strict instructions that she was not to step outside her room under any circumstances, no matter what happened. The landline in the suite had been disconnected. Her cell phone had been taken by Julian the day before, for security checks, and never returned. She was completely severed from the outside world. Suddenly, the chime of a message echoed from the smart home tablet resting on the table. Claire frowned. The device was only meant for room service requests. She tapped the screen curiously. A message appeared on the internal messaging app, the sender labeled, "Natalie." Claire's heart lurched. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. "Claire, help me. They let me go, but I have no money, no phone. I'm behind the kitchen, alley number 4. I'm scared. There are men staring at me. Don't call Julian's guards. I'm afraid they'll lock me up again. Can you come down here? Just 5 minutes, please." Attached was a blurry photo of Natalie curled in a corner, looking exhausted and terrified. Panic surged through Claire. She tried calling Julian through the internal line but only heard a busy signal. Lucas didn't pick up either. Time was slipping away, and fear for her only close friend drowned out every warning Julian had given her. She reasoned with herself. The kitchen was just downstairs, still inside the hotel grounds. She would go down, get Natalie, and come right back. Nothing would happen. Claire grabbed an oversized hoodie, pulled the hood low to hide her distinctive hair, and avoided the penthouse's private elevator. Julian's keycard was needed to activate it. Instead, she slipped into the emergency stairwell, descended 2 floors, and blended into the housekeeping staff using the service elevator. The plan worked far too smoothly. No guards waited on the lower stairwell, an unheard-of oversight, or perhaps something carefully orchestrated. Claire merged into the stream of employees pushing cleaning carts, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. When the elevator opened onto the ground-floor kitchen hallway, the smell of food and the clatter of dishes eased her nerves just enough to breathe. She pushed through the side door into alley number 4 as the message had described. The metal door slammed shut behind her. The outside was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the chaos within. No Natalie, no movement. Only large dumpsters and the long shadows cast by the opposite building. The hair on Claire's neck prickled. Her instincts screamed she was wrong, completely wrong. "Natalie," she whispered, stepping backward toward the door, hand shaking as she reached for the handle, but it was already locked from the inside. At that moment, an old gray van with no license plate rolled slowly across the mouth of the alley, blocking the exit. The side door slid open. Claire didn't even have time to scream. 2 dark figures lunged. A cloth drenched in something chemical pressed over her nose and mouth. Darkness swallowed her whole. The last thought flickering through her mind was not fear but a sharp, aching regret. "Julian, I'm sorry." Claire awoke in a dim room with no windows, low ceiling, and a single bulb hanging from a wire that cast a sickly yellow glow. Her wrists were numb from being bound for too long, her mouth dry, her body aching, though there were no signs she had been beaten. She lay still, listening for any sound beyond the pounding of her own heart. But all she heard was absolute silence. The metal door creaked open, flooding the room with harsh light. A man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, gray-streaked hair neatly combed, wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit and carrying the faint scent of cigarette smoke with every measured step. He pulled a chair across from her and sat down with unsettling calm, as though he wasn't the one who had ordered her kidnapping, but merely a host beginning an important conversation. "Hello, Claire," he said in a smooth, deep American voice. "I'm Vincent Moretti. You may have heard my name in old news reports, or in the kinds of stories people combinate. Never tell all the way through." Claire didn't answer, but her eyes never left him. Vincent tilted his head, smiling faintly as though gauging her courage. "I apologize for the manner in which you were brought here, but believe me, if I hadn't done it this way, you would never learn the truth." Claire swallowed, her lips cracked. "What truth?" Vincent clasped his hands, elbows resting on his knees. "About Julian, about Nick, and about your father." The name hit her like a blow. "My father?" Vincent nodded slowly. "Robert Bennett. He was a lawyer, but before that, he was a courier for my organization, a man who transported documents and information between factions during the chaotic years of Las Vegas. He was smart, discreet, and knew far more than he ever should have." Claire shook her head, throat tightening. "You're lying. I have the files. You can read them yourself." Vincent slipped a folder from his inner jacket pocket and placed it on the cold metal table. Claire didn't reach for it, but her eyes remained locked on the bold letters stamped across the cover, "Robert Bennett Confidential." Vincent continued, his tone patient, almost instructive. "Julian wasn't the first to pull you into this game. Nick was the one who opened the door. He was ordered to watch you over a year ago. You didn't just happen to become the girlfriend of a financial manager working under Romano. That was intentional." Claire recoiled as if struck. "Nick watched me? He was planted to determine whether you possessed any of your father's remaining documents. Robert vanished from our radar years ago, yet some things remain unaccounted for. And when Julian began showing signs of wanting out, wanting to legitimize his empire, the balance shifted. Control the information, control the power. And you, Claire, sit right at the center." She trembled, Memories of Nick cascaded through her mind, his sudden visits, his oddly specific questions disguised as casual conversation, the times he insisted on helping her sort through her father's old boxes. "He never loved me," she whispered. "No," Vincent replied without hesitation. "But I believe Julian does." Her head snapped up. Vincent studied her intently. "He dismantled his entire surveillance network after you kissed him. For a man like Julian Romano, that is the most reckless move he could make. He chose emotion over power. And that is when I knew you weren't his asset. You were his weakness." Claire's fists tightened, her voice barely steady. "What do you want? I want your help. All you need to do is confirm that Julian has been secretly contacting an independent legal team to pull out of the organization. If you confirm it, you walk free. If not," he lifted one shoulder, his gaze turning cold, "I have no reason to keep you alive." Claire looked at the folder, then at Vincent. Her mind spun wildly. Julian, Nick, her father, every quiet, ordinary year of her life rearranged itself into a labyrinth of secrets and manipulation. Yet beneath all the confusion, one truth rose above the rest like a voice in the dark. She needed answers. And only Julian could give them to her. Claire sat frozen in the cramped holding room, her mind unable to break free from Vincent's words or the image of her father stamped on the worn leather folder he had placed before her. She had convinced herself everything was just a misunderstanding, that Julian was simply too suspicious, and the world he lived in too dangerous for anyone to trust innocence. But when Nick's name surfaced in the middle of that twisted game, every wall she had built inside her collapsed in an instant. The door opened again. Claire lifted her head, and her heart stopped. It was Nick. He walked in with his hands tucked in his pockets, wearing the same familiar face she had once loved, once trusted, once confided in more deeply than anyone else. But his eyes now were cold, so cold she barely recognized him. "Hi," he said softly, as if they were simply meeting at a cafe and not in the aftermath of her abduction. Claire didn't answer. She only stared at him, as if by looking hard enough she could uncover a single crack of remorse behind his gaze. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," Nick continued, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "I never wanted you caught up in this. I really did try to keep my distance." "You watched me," Claire said, her voice rough and edged with disbelief. "Every step, every day, every night, everything I told you, everything I believed, was just part of your plan." Nick bowed his head, fingers laced together. "At the beginning, yes. I was ordered to get close to you, earn your trust, find out if you held any of Robert Bennett's documents. Your father possessed information that could destroy not one but 3 major organizations. Everyone assumed he'd destroyed it. All, but we weren't sure. And you were the last trail." "I don't know anything," Claire nearly shouted. "I'm just a normal person. A corporate employee with nothing to my past except a few photos and some dusty notebooks." "I know," Nick whispered, but they didn't believe it. "And after you met Julian, everything spun out of control." Claire narrowed her eyes. "So why are you here now? To lie one more time? Or to convince me to turn against Julian?" Nick let out a hollow laugh, his expression tightening before settling into its usual calm. "Julian isn't what you think he is. He's two-faced. One side is the crime lord with a network stretching across half the country, and the other is a man trying to polish his image by using you as a tool. He saved me," Claire said through her teeth. "And you let them kidnap me, lock me up, interrogate me." Nick didn't move, then sighed. "Vincent thinks you'll side with him, or at least oppose Julian. But I know you're not that easy to manipulate. You're stronger than you think, and that's the problem. You're the one variable no one can predict. You make Julian hesitate, and a hesitant Julian is something Vincent will never tolerate." Claire felt herself go still, her vision blurring as layer upon layer of betrayal folded over her. "And you, Nick? Where do you stand in all of this? Are you the one betraying me, or just another pawn?" Nick looked at her for a long time before answering. "I used to think I was in control of the game, but the moment I looked into your eyes, I realized I'd already lost." Claire turned away. She didn't want to hear any of it. No words could ever stitch together the wound he had carved into her. Nick stood and headed for the door, but before he left, he stopped. "Whether you believe it or not, I did love you." And that was the only part that wasn't planned. The door closed, And Claire sat alone, no tears, no anger, only an echoing emptiness growing inside her. One truth stood clearer than ever. She had been used, betrayed, and thrown into the center of a war whose sides she still couldn't fully see. But one thing she knew for certain: she had to escape, not only to survive, but to discover who truly held the final truth. Julian stood motionless in the control room on the 32nd floor, the glow from dozens of surveillance screens painting his tense face with a cold, metallic sheen. No one spoke, not even Lucas, his most trusted guard, who rarely hesitated to offer advice. On the central screen was the image of a mangled SUV crushed at the front, shards of broken glass strewn everywhere, the blaring alarm still ringing in Julian's head like a death knell. Claire had been kidnapped in broad daylight, in the very heart of the city he believed he commanded. Julian clenched his fists until his knuckles blanched. Inside him rose not just anger, but a tidal wave of regret, anguish, and the purest fear he had felt in years. He had pushed her away out of caution, out of fear of losing control, and that distance had made her a perfect target. "Vincent," he murmured, almost as if confirming what his instincts already knew. Vincent Moretti, the most cunning opponent he had ever faced, the only man who had learned to weaponize every crack in Julian's armor. And now, he had found the final weak spot Julian hadn't been able to hide: Claire. Lucas stepped forward and placed a file on the table. "We just recovered signal from a device left in Claire's car. She may be in the old industrial sector north of Henderson. But Julian, there's more." He opened the folder, revealing copies of encrypted messages between Nick and an underground communication channel. Julian read each line, his eyes darkening. Every word felt like a blade carving deeper into him. Nick hadn't only betrayed Claire, he had betrayed the entire organization, a double agent, hiding in plain sight. For months, feigning loyalty, feigning competence, all while orchestrating something far bigger than Julian had imagined. And Claire, the one person who had made Julian consider a different life, a life beyond power and shadows, had been placed at the center of that conspiracy. Julian shoved his chair back and walked out of the room. He said nothing he didn't need to. Lucas and the others followed immediately. The long hallway felt void of noise except for Julian's heavy footsteps, and even the wind from the far window seemed colder, sharper, mirroring the storm rising inside him. In the private elevator, Julian stared at his reflection in the steel wall. He no longer saw the impenetrable figure the world feared. He saw a man filled with worry, with pain and a trace of fear he wished no one had ever witnessed. "She may think I stopped caring," he said quietly, not speaking to anyone in particular. "She may think I'm just like the others, using her and discarding her." Lucas stayed silent. He knew words would be useless. Julian looked forward. "I won't let them hurt her. Not for honor, not for power, but because if she's gone, I won't have a reason to continue." In that instant, the cold mask of Julian Romano shattered. All those years of carefully crafted walls crumbled. He was no longer the man who ruled through fear, the man immune to weakness. He was simply someone desperate to find the woman he loved, lost somewhere inside the wreckage of his own misjudgment. When the car stopped before the underground compound, Julian's stare sharpened again. No hesitation, no doubt. But beneath that renewed resolve lived a silent vow. If he had the chance to hold Claire again, he would tell her everything. No more walls, no more distance, and he would never lose her again. Julian stepped down from the armored black vehicle, his boots pressing into the reddish dust outside the abandoned warehouse hidden deep in the northern Henderson industrial zone, the last location where Claire's signal had vanished completely. The sky was dim, not because night had fallen, but because a sandstorm was rolling in from the nearby desert, the wind howling through sheets of rusted metal and making them creak like an omen. Before him sprawled a sprawling complex of forgotten warehouses, their concrete walls discolored by time, barbed wire strung along the perimeter, and at least 2 watchtowers where armed guards paced with cold precision. Julian tightened his grip on the handgun at his hip, eyes sweeping across the terrain with a sharpness carved from years of surviving battles like this. He didn't need confirmation of who was inside, didn't need proof of anything except the one thing he knew with absolute certainty: Claire was in there, and he would bring her out no matter what it cost him. Lucas approached with a satellite-extracted layout. 3 main entry points, 1 through the front door, 2 through the back storage tunnel, and the side ventilation shaft. At least 8 armed men within 20 meters of the center. "We suspect an internal alarm system." Julian nodded, his voice low and unwavering. "Split into 3 units. Unit 1 follows me through the main entrance. Unit 2 circles around the back. Unit 3 takes the roof and waits for the signal. No one fires unless absolutely necessary. Claire must come out alive." The men in light armor nodded in unison. No one questioned him. No one suggested an alternative. Julian was not merely their commander, he was the one who would go in first, as he always did when failure was not an option. His tall, unyielding silhouette moved into the darkness with 12 others branching out exactly as planned. As they neared the main door, the wind roared so fiercely that voices were swallowed whole. Only hand signals remained. Julian raised his fist to halt the group, eyes snapping toward the watchtower where a guard had just turned away. A silenced shot cracked, quietly through the air, and the man toppled without a sound. Lucas slipped forward to break the electronic lock. It took less than 10 seconds before the steel door creaked open. They swept inside, shadows moving like ghosts along the blackened concrete hallways, every footstep echoing with the rhythm of war. A static-laced radio whined from an unseen security room. Julian signaled for teams to split. He and Lucas pushed toward the center. The place surveillance hinted was holding a room lit by a pale, flickering bulb and guarded by 2 men. His heart tightened when he saw Claire's silhouette slumped against the wall, eyes closed, her wrists tied to a metal bar. Without a heartbeat's hesitation, he surged forward. He and Lucas struck silently, taking down both guards in seconds. Julian dropped to his knees, cutting the binds around her wrists, his voice thick and breaking. "Claire, it's me. Can you hear me?" She blinked, her cracked lips parting slowly as life returned to her. "Eyes. Julian." Just that one word enough to shatter every barrier inside him. He pulled her into his chest, holding her as if letting go would mean losing her forever. But there was no time. The alarm shrieked through the building, bouncing off steel and concrete like a scream. Someone had discovered the breach. Julian lifted Claire into his arms, motioning to Lucas and the strike team to begin immediate retreat. Gunfire erupted in the distant corridor. The smell of gunpowder thickened the air, mixing with dust like a nightmare come alive. Julian didn't look back. He didn't slow. He held Claire firmly against him, his coat shielding her from the shards of bullet-splintered metal. They burst through the rear tunnel just as Unit 2 engaged the enemy response team. Outside, the armored vehicle waited with its doors open. Julian didn't release Claire until she was safely in the arms of medics inside. His face was streaked with sweat, his hair matted with blood and dust, but his eyes never left her, not even for a second. As the vehicle sped away from danger, Julian finally let out a deep breath. He had retrieved her. But she carried back more than wounds. She carried the truth that could change everything. And Julian knew the real war had only begun. Gunfire echoed behind them as the armored vehicle accelerated, tires crushing broken glass, and spent casings scattered across the dirt road. Julian sat beside Claire, one arm wrapped around her shoulders while his eyes never stopped scanning the world outside the narrow window. Lucas sat in the front, barking tense instructions through the comms, every word taut with urgency. Claire was still trembling, cold sweat beading on her forehead. But she forced herself upright, clutching Julian's hand. Outside, the escort vehicles swerved sharply. A large truck barreled out of a blind corner behind an old warehouse, blocking their path before anyone could react. A split second later, an explosion ripped through the lead vehicle. Flames and smoke swallowed the road. Lucas ordered a full retreat, but the formation was already fractured. Julian realized they were trapped in a crossfire. He threw the door open and shouted, "Out! Into the factory now!" He pulled Claire from the vehicle, using the rising smoke as cover as they sprinted toward the empty industrial building nearby. Bullets whistled past their ears, punching into the concrete walls with bone-rattling force. Julian shoved Claire behind a thick steel column, then turned and fired, covering Lucas and 2 guards as they fell back. Claire tried to steady her breathing, bracing against the wall, but the wound in her shoulder burned sharply. A bullet had grazed her as they fled the vehicle, a searing slice that now stained her shirt with spreading red. Julian glanced back and froze when he saw the blood. He rushed to her, assessing quickly. "I'm fine. Just a scratch." "Keep going, Julian," she gasped, gripping the collar of his jacket. Julian nodded, determination solid as iron. "We can't hold this place. Lucas, the loading bay exit. Call medical support to rendezvous at Alley 4. On it." Lucas shouted, firing back as he guided the group deeper into the shadows of the warehouse. instead of climbing upward where snipers could pick them off. Julian led Claire through the cluttered maze of rusted machinery on the ground level, using the darkness and chaotic layout to slip past their pursuers. Their footsteps thundered across the old production floor, echoing between broken assembly lines as gunfire cracked behind them. "Just a little farther," Julian murmured, squeezing her hand. 50 more meters. But as they neared the rear exit, a masked gunman kicked the door open. He barely raised his weapon before Julian fired twice, dropping him instantly. Julian didn't pause. He kicked the heavy door wide. Blinding sunlight flooded in. In the narrow alley behind the warehouse, a disguised ambulance waited with its engine growling, rear doors already thrown open. "Go, move!" Lucas shouted, unleashing the last rounds of cover fire. Julian swept Claire into his arms and sprinted. They dove into the vehicle just as the driver slammed the accelerator. The ambulance lunged forward, tires screeching as the nightmare behind them shrank into smoke and distance. The doors clanged shut, sealing them away from chaos. Claire lay on the stretcher while medics worked swiftly over her. She caught Julian's hand, her gaze fixed on his blood-streaked face. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered. Julian smiled, truly smiled for the first time in days. He brushed her hair back gently, bent close to her ear, his voice soft enough to drown out the wail of sirens. "I promised that if I had even one breath left, I would find you. And I kept my word." Claire woke to the soft glow of dim white lights and the familiar sting of antiseptic that immediately tightened her temples. The ceiling above her was high and still, a strange kind of quiet after days spent surrounded by gunfire, shouting, and the frantic thrum of a heart fighting against fear. She moved her arm slightly, feeling the tenderness of a carefully bandaged wound and the steady drip of the IV beside her. When she turned her head, wincing as a sharp ache pulsed through her shoulder, the pain dissolved the moment she saw Julian sitting in the chair beside her bed, his head resting against the armrest, his eyes closed as though he had been awake through the entire night. She could not remember the last time she had seen him so peaceful. No coldness, no mask of authority. Just a man sitting vigil beside the woman he loved, carrying exhaustion, fear, and relief in equal measure. Claire reached out and brushed her fingers lightly against his. Julian jerked awake, and in that split second, his eyes brightened, as though the world had clicked back into place. He caught her hand, holding it tight yet gently, as if one wrong move might hurt her. "You're awake," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "How do you feel?" Claire smiled faintly, her gaze lingering on him. "A little sore, but I'm all right. What about you?" Julian straightened, his hand never leaving hers. He exhaled deeply, as though releasing a weight he had been carrying inside his chest for far too long. "I'm all right as long as you're still here." He paused, lifting his head, and for once, there was no guardedness in his eyes. "Claire, I owe you an apology. For doubting you, for pushing you away, for not believing that someone could come into my life with no intention except to care." Claire shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "No, I understand. You live in a world where trust can get you killed. I don't blame you for protecting yourself. I was only hurt because there were moments I thought you didn't care." Julian leaned forward, resting his forehead on her hand. "I cared, from the very beginning, even when I tried to deny it. You walked into my world like a storm that tore everything apart, and I was afraid. Claire, I've never feared anything until the moment I realized I could lose you." She pulled his hand closer, her fingertips brushing the sharp lines of his now thinner face. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. But I need to know something." What Vincent said, was it true? Did my father really work with them? Julian held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, but he tried to get out, and because of that, he became a target. I don't believe he left anything behind for you, but the moment they thought there was even the slightest possibility, they would never stop hunting you." Claire's lips trembled as tears spilled freely. "So all this time, I wasn't innocent. I've been living with a ghost I never knew existed." Julian wiped her tears, his expression softening in a way she had rarely seen. "You are not a ghost, Claire. You are the only light I have, ever known. And no matter how much past there is, no matter how many secrets, the present is the only thing I want to hold on to." Claire nodded and closed her eyes, leaning into him, finding safety in the only place that had ever made her feel whole in the midst of chaos. Outside the window, dawn was beginning to bloom, its first gentle rays slipping through the white curtains, like a promise that after everything, hope still existed for hearts once torn apart by shadows and fear. Claire was discharged on a quiet afternoon with no press, no noise, just the familiar SUV parked at the hospital entrance, and Julian leaning against the door in clothes so simple it startled her. No suit, no grandeur, no mask of a kingpin, only a man waiting for the woman he loved as if the rest of the world meant nothing. Claire stepped out, the wound in her shoulder nearly healed, though the fractures in her heart still lingered. She said nothing as she climbed into the car. Julian closed the door gently, before taking the driver's seat. The ride to the penthouse unfolded in silence, not a silence of distance, but one where two souls carried too many truths and did not yet know where to begin. When the elevator opened onto the top floor, and she stepped into a room filled with warm light and white daisies, her favorite flower, something she had once mentioned casually over wine, she stopped in her tracks. Julian walked ahead, pushed the door open fully, then stepped aside for her. Claire moved slowly, her fingers grazing the back of a chair, the rim of a potted plant by the window, the small details he had arranged with such care, as if each choice was a quiet confession that he had listened, remembered, and thought of her far more than she ever realized. She turned back to him. Julian stood at the doorway, his eyes both cautious and longing. He knew apologies meant nothing without action. "Claire," he began, his voice low and warm, "I've made so many mistakes. Not only with you, but with myself. I believed I had to be strong, in control, to protect you. But the truth is, that instinct is what cost me you." Claire stepped closer, her eyes free of anger, holding only sadness and a love that had refused to die. "I was angry, Julian, deeply, for not trusting me, for leaving me alone when you should have been there. But then I realized we're both trapped by the past we carry. I by a father I never understood, and you by the nightmares you lived through." Julian nodded and moved toward her. "I won't promise there won't be chaos again, but I promise I will never push you away. Whatever happens, I'll tell you. I'll let you in. And I'll face everything with you." Claire lifted her eyes to him, the distance between them now no wider than a breath. "I don't need you to be perfect, Julian. I just need you to be truthful. As long as we don't let go of each other, I believe we can survive anything." Julian bowed his forehead to hers, his hand tightening around hers as if reclaiming something he had nearly lost forever. "I love you, Claire. Not because you were the first person to move me, but because you are the first person who ever made me want to live honestly, to leave that world behind and start over." Claire smiled through silent tears. "I forgive you, not because I'm weak, but because I refuse to let our love suffocate beneath mistakes of the past. I still choose you, Julian, and this time, let's move forward, no looking back." Julian pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as though allowing his heart to be fully seen for the first time. In that sunlit room, among healing wounds and truths finally spoken aloud, they found their way back to each other. No distant promises, just a present filled with enough truth and courage to begin again, and that alone felt like a miracle. 1 month after Claire left the hospital, Las Vegas remained its relentless, glittering self, loud, chaotic, ever-moving, but her world had shifted. No more nightmares, when she closed her eyes. No more drifting through her own life. Instead, there was Julian's steady, quiet presence. Her shoulder had long healed, and the fractures in her heart had begun to mend beneath his patience. That evening, he told her he was taking her to dinner, not something extravagant, just a simple date, like ordinary people. Claire wore a soft silk dress, letting her hair fall loosely around her shoulders. Her heart fluttered, not from fear, but from the way Julian had been watching her all day, an intensity that felt both eager and solemn. When they arrived, she realized it was the rooftop of the hotel where everything had begun. But this time, there was no blaring music, no crowds. Only a small table lit by candles and strings of warm golden lights, drifting above them as if suspended in their own private world above the city. They ate, in the gentlest silence. When dessert came, Julian rose, walked around the table, and Claire's breath caught when he went down on one knee. One hand rested softly on her knee, the other opening a deep blue velvet box. Inside, a diamond shimmered brilliantly, but not as brightly as the sincerity in his eyes. "Claire," he said, his voice dipping into the quiet of the night. "I know this may sound insane. We haven't been together long, You're still healing. Everyone out there would say this is too soon, too rushed. He paused, letting the moment breathe. But after that night at the warehouse, when I almost lost you, I realized time means nothing. Waiting is a luxury I won't waste another second on. I've lived in darkness too long to let go of the one light I've ever known just because someone out there thinks we should wait for the right moment. To me, the right moment is now. Claire felt her heart tremble as every word sank into the deepest part of her. Julian continued, his voice raw. I'm not asking for forgiveness, you already gave me that. I'm asking if you're willing to take one more chance with me. To choose a life where, every morning, I'm the first person you see, and every night, the last hand you hold is mine. Claire Bennett, will you marry me? Claire covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. She didn't need time. She didn't need caution. After surviving life and death, time was nothing more than a number. She nodded, her voice soft but certain. Yes, Julian, yes. Not because you're perfect, but because you're the man I want to love for the rest of my life, whether that's tomorrow or 10 years from now. Julian slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose and wrapped her tightly in his arms. In the sweeping night wind and the dazzling lights of Las Vegas below, their kiss was no longer hesitant or afraid. It was a promise full and unbroken that no matter how wild the world became, neither of them would ever walk through it alone again. The night sky over Las Vegas stretched wide and shimmering, glowing with the brilliance of thousands of city lights, while in the distance the restless hum of traffic moved endlessly through a place that never surrendered to sleep. On the familiar rooftop of the Romano Hotel, once the stage for misunderstandings and danger, there now stood a different beginning. Claire and Julian stood side by side, their fingers intertwined, their eyes lifted toward the horizon. A soft breeze passed over them, lifting strands of her hair, and he looked at her as though nothing beyond the two of them held any weight or meaning. Behind them, a small table flickered with warm candlelight, a few close companions speaking quietly with one another. There was no extravagance, no grand wedding, only a gentle, honest evening filled with hearts once wounded yet still brave enough to love again. Claire rested her head against Julian's shoulder and whispered that she had never imagined finding a place where she truly belonged, not because it was perfect, but because it was the one place she could be herself without hiding or pretending. Julian tightened his hand around hers and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. Sometimes, he murmured, what we need is not a new life, but someone who gives us the strength to rewrite the old story with a different ending. The story of Julian and Claire was not just a journey between love and danger, trust and betrayal, but a quiet reminder that no matter how dark a past may be, we can still choose light, choose compassion, and choose forgiveness. That in a world full of upheaval, the most precious thing is neither power nor wealth, but a person willing to stay when you have nothing left, someone who loves you even when you are not sure you deserve it. And if you have reached the end of this story, thank you for walking with us through a journey filled with turbulence, yet steeped in tenderness. What do you think of Julian and Claire's love story? Does it remind you of something in your own life? Someone who once passed through your world and left an imprint behind? A choice you once regretted, or a belief you somehow lost along the way? Share your thoughts in the comments below, from your own heart, because perhaps your story can touch someone else, just as Julian and Claire have touched you today. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like and share the video so that more heartfelt stories can be carried to those who might need them. Every subscription from you is a great encouragement for us to continue bringing meaningful, thoughtful, and deeply human content each day. Thank you for listening, for accompanying us, and for feeling this story with your whole heart. We wish you good health, joyful days filled with peace, and a life that is always full of love. Goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.